Escondido leaders refuse to reconsider a shelter for migrant children arriving from Central America. The Filner scandal. 1 year later, Irene McCormack Jackson's KPBS interview and the fate of Bob Filner's progressive agenda. And San Diego sports teams at a crossroads. The Chargers embark on a pivotal season that could foretell their future here, while the Padres trade top players. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, July 25th. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the Roundtable today, our KPBS investigative reporter, Amitha Sharma, Fronteras reporter Joe Replico of KPBS News, and sports writer Jay Paris. Well, the Bob Filner scandal broke a year ago this week when a top aide, Irene McCormack Jackson, announced at a press conference that she was suing the San Diego mayor for sexual harassment. Immediately, and the phrase, the Filner headlock, entered the lexicon, and many more women came forward to tell their traumatic Filner tales. Here's some of what McCormack Jackson said in an exclusive interview with KPBS this week.
Why did you come forward when you did?
Well, I did it for the other women that I saw this being, that I thought it was happening to. So a lot of it had to do with watching young women come into the office to give a presentation to the mayor and then suddenly being pulled into his private office and then them coming out 2 or 3 minutes later looking a little bit shocked. And that was in May and in June, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I said, this is crazy. It's not right. This man, something is wrong with him. He's a predator. He's mean. He's a bully. He needs to stop what he's doing.
And I know you said that.
All right, Amitha, you were talking with a lot of these women in private, trying to get this story built up. You knew about it for a long time. The dam finally broke. What caused that?
Well, in the second week of July, former San Diego City Councilwoman Donna Fry, along with lawyers Corey Briggs and Marco Gonzalez, hand-delivered letters to Mayor Bob Filner calling on him to resign. Now, at that time, Donna Fry had recently, just months earlier, quit her job working for the mayor. She said that she had credible evidence that Filner had been sexually harassing women. So she was the first person to make these allegations public.
And once Irene came forward, remind us, some of the other women told you about their encounters. What were some of the
well, right after Donna Fry came forward, it took nearly 2 weeks before the first person came forward who was an alleged target of this, and in this case it was Irene McCormack Jackson, Filner's communications director. After that, then women slowly started coming out. Many of these women were very strong, smart, accomplished women like retired Rear Admiral Ronnie Froman and Sharon Burney Cloward, who heads the San Diego Port Tenants Association, Joyce Gaddis, who's a dean here at San Diego State University, and Patty Roscoe, who's a local businesswoman. They had the stories of just inappropriate sexual conduct by Filner toward them.
Mm-hmm. Now, we should know, KPBS this week, when we did talk with Irene McCormack Jackson, we did reach out to Mayor Filner. He didn't wish to be interviewed, but to be fair, he did speak briefly, and I'll remind our audience, back in December when he was sentenced for some of these instances, some of these crimes, and he said, I want to apologize to my family who stood by me, and he said, more importantly, I most sincerely want to apologize to the women I've hurt and offended, and he said the behaviors before this court today will never be repeated, and he did say that very publicly at that time. Haven't heard from him this week, though.
He's been relatively quiet, yes.
Okay. So let's reflect back a moment. I mean, what a difference a year makes. We were in such turmoil last year, anxiety, all of this battle, the scandal, the accusations, the denials. Finally, the mayor resigns, and he was fairly defiant at that time. Now we flash forward. We've got a new mayor who, and we'll get to Bob Filner and his progressive agenda in a moment, but he's ziplining yesterday with the Democratic head of the city council here. T. Glow and Kay Fall are ziplining at Comic-Con, and it's quite a different atmosphere we're seeing at City Hall than what's happened, what we were looking at a year ago.
It is different, but Mayor Filner is a pro-choice, pro-gay rights, middle-of-the-road Republican. I don't think anyone would question that. And I think even at one point during last year's campaign, he sort of bristled when reporters highlighted the fact that he was a Republican. And he's not ignorant. He knows that Democratic voter registration in this town now outnumbers Republican voter registration. So he is walking a fine line. Nonetheless, he is not pro-labor. He is pro-business. He was against the minimum wage hike. So there are stark differences between him and Bob Filner. He was in favor of pension reform. Filner was against pension reform. So there are these differences between the two.
And it's back to, the tensions in the political debates, but the scandal itself is gone. That had the whole city on edge at that time.
It is gone,
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what the voters who supported Bob Filner, as you note, there's a Democratic majority now in the city of San Diego. They were excited. They had a progressive mayor for the first time in a long time in San Diego, and a progressive agenda, and that has kind of fallen by the wayside to a large degree. What were some of the things that he did fulfill, that is Bob Filner, in his short time in office? He was sworn in December and was out by August.
Well, he accomplished quite a bit. He reached 5-year contracts with the city's employee unions, which included pay freezes, which is a significant accomplishment. And I dare say that the major mayoral candidates in this town would not have been talking about neighborhoods during last year's fall campaign. They would not have been talking about the importance of neighborhoods. They would not have been talking about the importance of environmental justice. They would not have been talking about the importance of inclusive government, where the concerns of San Diegans from the more poorer communities carried as much weight as those with money and power. And to his credit, Filner created office hours one Saturday a month where citizens could come in and bring their concerns to the table. He created a veterans employment department within the office of the mayor. He created an office in Tijuana to strengthen ties with our neighbor to the south. He also added money to the city's arts budget. So he did accomplish quite a bit.
And the veterans, Joe, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, there are some things that I wonder if they would be different now if Filner were still in office, like, for example, the Barrio Logan propositions B and C. I mean, how might that have had a different outcome if he were running the show?
Well, he didn't have a vote, but he certainly would have backed the community plan, which was very dear to Councilman David Adams, which
Faulkner in the business community did not, absolutely, So you wonder about that. You wonder about veterans issues and homelessness, too, of course, because he was a champion of that.
Right, so he was a big champion, and he rolled into office, and during the campaign, during his 2012 mayoral campaign, he said he was going to put an end to homelessness. But we all know that's going to take hundreds of millions of dollars. That's going to take tremendous political will. That's going to take the ratification of a Mental Health Systems Act that, as you know, Reagan and the Republicans undid during the 1980s. That's not something that Filner carried the torch for when he was in Congress. So would he have been able to do that? Highly unlikely. He wanted to create a bus system that was as fast and as frequent as a subway system, but we've all been downtown during rush hour. If you're on a bus, you're sitting in traffic. So that wasn't going to happen. He wanted to expand the port. He wanted to bring more to San Diego through the port than bananas and cars. But we've got shallow waters in order for those tankers to come in.
And we don't have a rail link to the east, so that.
And we don't have a cargo. We've got a community that doesn't want these big trucks carrying the cargo out.
Jay? So I think with Filner, I think he was the first Democratic mayor in 2 decades, maybe 20 years or so. We talk about muddying the waters. Well, is that going to hurt Democratic or the Progressive Party going forward? I mean, will that always be a looking back point? We'll see. Look what happened last time you put in a progressive in office.
That's an interesting point. We had Carl Luna on, a political scientist, of course, at the time of the special election, and he said Faulkner may well be the last kind of moderate white Republican elected here because the demographics, as we noted early on, are changing. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if the Filner legacy with the demographics changing taints the Democrats going forward in the city.
But I've specifically spoken with friends and acquaintances who really were affected by that, who for maybe the first time had voted Democrat and
Now they're
feel
turned
like they
off,
got burned.
Yeah, turned off to it. All right, I'm sure we'll see going forward. We got another election in a couple of years in this city and across the country. All right, we're going to move on now. Escondido seemed to solidify its reputation as an inhospitable place for undocumented immigrants again this week. Advocates for migrant kids from Central America who crossed the border illegally joined the ACLU in pleading with city leaders to reconsider their decision against a temporary shelter. But Jill, the answer didn't change. Tell us about that proposal. What were the high points of it?
Well, so the Department of Health and Human Services, which is the federal agency that's in charge of unaccompanied children who come across the border illegally, so children who are not with adults. They had petitioned to put in a 96-bed shelter in a former nursing home in Escondido. They had sort of been pushed by the city into this particular place. They looked at some hotels in Escondido in the past that were up for rent, and the city sort of didn't think that was the appropriate place to have this shelter. They also wanted to have this public hearing. They wanted the public to weigh in on this issue, and so they sort of, said, why don't you look at this place? As we know, last month, about 500 people showed up at this planning commission meeting, which was a big surprise to a lot of us. Most of them vehemently opposed to having this shelter. It's in a residential neighborhood. And then voted 7-0 against putting the shelter in. And then this last vote this week was really supposed to be just a rubber stamping of that decision. It was on the consent calendar, which means that, they had pretty much already made up their mind that this was not going to happen. And, something like 200 people on the other side of the debate showed up, and there was a march, and a lot of people sort of speaking in favor of the children and, saying that Escondido should think of these kids as refugees, and that this is, a good thing that the city should do. Also, that it would create jobs. And once again, unanimously voted against. I believe there was one abstention, but no discussion. Done.
That was that. Now, this group that was behind this, Southwest Key, who are they? Were they politically naive coming into Escondido with this?
Well, that's a good question. Southwest Key is one of the main contractors that runs these shelters. They have two other shelters in San Diego County, very small, 10 to 15 beds, so that's just sort of like a whole different ballgame. But they're also running the big temporary shelter up at the Ventura military base where they're housing, something like 500 children. And so they, she kind of answered that in the first, one of the representatives from Southwest Key was at that first meeting and said, hey, the reason we came here in the first place is because you guys had these hotels for rent. You were advertising property that looked like a place we could do it.
Yeah.
But I think that, they have sort of admitted kind of privately since then, they won't speak publicly, by the way, that they were naive, that they didn't quite realize what they were getting into.
Well, we've got ACLU, again, is looking at this and maybe a legal challenge and all, but they have a history up there in Escondido. Give us a little bit of background there on some of the conflicts.
Yeah, well, the ACLU has sued Escondido several times or threatened lawsuits, and so have private citizens. 2006, Escondido passed a law trying to make it illegal for landlords to rent to people in the country illegally. ACLU sued, they backed off, they didn't go through with that law. In 2012, I believe, they were sued for protesters. They run these checkpoints fairly often where they're supposedly looking for people who are drunk, but then they also check people's driver's license, and that catches a lot of undocumented immigrants who don't have driver's license.
Another big controversy.
And so, right, and so they were sued then because they were not letting protesters show up at those checkpoints and film what was going on, and so they got sued for that, and again, they settled. So this time the ACLU, they haven't announced any legal action yet, but they say they're doing a full-scale investigation into how the decision-making process went down.
What would be the basis?
So they're looking at fair housing laws, state and federal fair housing laws, and discrimination. And, this is a planning issue. Often planning issues are, they do look at discrimination within planning decisions, and they're looking at whether or not they made decisions based on larger political views about federal immigration law to prohibit this place from coming in. Also looking at whether these children are a protected class. as children and as, potentially refugees.
Let's talk about the children for a minute. Of course, this was a very hot story a couple of weeks ago. We've had all sorts of international news. We've got all the trouble along the Gaza Strip and Israel's invasion there, and we've got, of course, the Ukraine situation and the tragedy of that airliner shot down. So this has kind of gone off the front page for a while, but it's still simmering here. And behind the scenes, what's going on with the children, particularly in San Diego County now, the ones that have come here?
Well, I mean, not a lot of children have come to San Diego County, which, is part of the reason it hasn't been such a big issue locally.
Much
There's
more
only
in Texas,
been, most of them are coming across the border in Texas. There's something like 1,500 children that they've caught at the San Diego border since last October in the fiscal year, but mostly coming through South Texas. And, right now it's sort of, so the kids, what happens is they get sent to some place where there's a shelter, so like the base in Ventura. And from there, they're placed with family members who might be anywhere in the country. And so from there, it's kind of, kids are sort of filtering around. Actually, the Department of Health and Human Services put out statistics today on where they've placed 33,000 children. There's about 2,000 in California, I think. No, more than that, I'm sorry. But the big ones are California, Texas, New York, kind of what we would expect. But right now, President Obama, probably as we speak, is meeting with the presidents of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, trying to come up with some options for dealing with this. And
there are no easy answers. I mean, this is a very complex problem with a lot of moving parts. Jay, you're up in a different part of North County, not in Escondido where you live. Cardiff, we're going to welcome a lot of these folks. You're going to find a shelter there?
There were some people in Encinitas that tried to put out a welcome mat and brought it up at least. I'm just curious, why did the numbers leap so dramatically?
It's still a bit of a mystery. I mean, it does seem like there was a rumor mill that got this going. But, it's also, the media makes it look like it was a huge leap all of a sudden. But really, I mean, the number, first of all, you look at last year and there were, the U.S. government was already expecting the numbers to, I believe, triple from the year before. It's been a pretty steady increase just in the last couple of years. But some people who really study the region would say that there's just a confluence of factors: drug trafficking, gangs, violence, these family separations that have just sort of all combined to create a perfect storm and just really start pushing people out.
Are any of the numbers going down now?
They are, actually. So the last couple of weeks there's been a dip, and it's still, no one sort of, I talked actually to the head of the Border Patrol Union yesterday, and he said, well, it might be because the train, which they call La Bestia, the beast, that takes a lot of people from southern Mexico up through like a huge portion of Mexico, it's been derailed for the past 2 weeks, so there just hasn't been that very popular method of transportation. Also, it's really hot in South Texas, and they often see a dip at this time of year. So there's sort of, no one's really saying whether, maybe it died down. We just kind of won't know for a few weeks.
And the last question I had, does the Planning Commission have the final word up there in Escondido, or can it be appealed?
Anyone can appeal the decision
to the full city council.
To the full city council.
Okay, so
I don't believe that anyone's done that yet, but that seems like a highly likely possibility.
All right, well, we'll certainly be watching that story as we move forward. Well, to paraphrase Thomas Paine, these are the days that try the souls of San Diego sports fans. The Padres' lackluster lineup leads the league in futility at the plate, and the Chargers appear to be either headed toward a new stadium or maybe headed out of town. Jay, let's start with baseball. Pennant races are heating up in many cities. A lot of fans are getting excited. Not so much here in San Diego.
Not so much. The Padres, they've gone from the boys of summer to the boys of bummer, if you will. And if you want to see some good baseball, I would suggest the Encinitas Little League, which out of 400 Little Leagues, there's only 2 Little Leagues left in Southern California.
There we go.
And they're playing this weekend up at Fletcher Hills.
And the Angels and the Tigers are up the road if you want to see some top major leaguers.
There's still some good baseball.
Yeah, there we go. That's right. But not baseball here in San Diego at the professional level.
Yeah, the Little League kind of carrying the water right now. The Padres, are where they usually are this time of year, but there was so much promise leading into the season. That's what makes this one.
Yeah, they had raised their payroll. They had some players they thought were going to maybe blossom this year. Instead, we've gotten rid of general manager. And tell us about some of the top players they've gotten rid of in the last
Houston Street, their top reliever, he was traded up the road to the Angels. Chase Headley, who really they thought was going to be a cornerstone they could build an entire team around. He was peddled to the Yankees.
All-star a few years ago, disappointing
right.
since.
Very disappointing, and turned down some lucrative offers from the Padres, long-term offers. This is the time of year with the trading deadline coming up. You're either a buyer or you're a seller, And the Padres have always been a seller. They're not out there actively looking for somebody to add to make that playoff push. They're serving almost as a farm system to the competitive teams that are looking to the playoffs.
So then what is their strategy?
Well, the strategy was this was going to be the year. 2012, 2013, 10 games under 500, but they were young players. It's like throwing some seeds in the garden. You gotta let them grow. So they 12 they didn't do so well. They got to grow a little more. 13 they didn't do so well. They got to grow a little more. This was the year. Instead, the rowdy kid down the street ran his red wagon through that garden because the plants didn't come up. And
Chase Hesley is the best example. He went south.
That's right. He went the other way. But with their what they want to say limited payroll and where they are. Their template, their blueprint is to draft and develop. And they drafted these players, and they didn't develop as they'd promised.
No, they're still kind of in the middle of the pack as far as attendance. I mean, it's hurting them some at the box office, but not that much.
Right. The attendance is pretty good, and a lot of that is San Diego. I mean, the tourists coming in Los Angeles.
Conventioneers across the street will come over. Hey, it's a nice night, beautiful ballpark. Let's go over and watch the game.
The Dodgers are in town. I mean, they fill it up. The Giants the same way. Yeah. So, the attendance is holding steady, but you just got to feel the pot for the Padre fans, and that patience is being tested every year.
Well, let's shift over to the Chargers.
Sure.
They're just opening training camp this week, Wednesday of this week, and they're hopeful this season, and they're hoping maybe some success in the field, maybe even getting to a Super Bowl might translate into some support here for a new stadium for them.
Well, it's the 20-year anniversary of 1994 when they did go to their lone Super Bowl, so maybe they're hoping that's a sign of things to come. But it's the second year Mike McCoy, and the team did make the playoffs last year after a 3-year stretch of not making the playoffs. That's what's happening on the field, and they've added some players as well off the field. The quest to find a new Charger Stadium still rumbles on, and there's always that L.A. carrot out there that might push people to do something down here.
Right.
That's made a couple of interesting turns as well of late.
Big story in the L.A. Times over the weekend in the sports section about L.A. wooing 3 teams, the Chargers being one of them, a new push for stadium. They've been a couple of decades now without a team in that major market, and of course the Chargers try to hold that as kind of a lever, and the NFL does as well, not coming here with a Super Bowl again to get a new stadium or let's move the team, all of this stuff in the mix, and it plays out with what happens on the field this year.
Sure does, and some things have changed up in L.A. I mean, the NFL is more motivated than ever to get a team in the nation's second market. I mean, Roger Goodell, their commissioner, makes $44 million a year, and they're not paying him to say status quo. They want to grow the pie. And there's talk now maybe even the league building the stadium up there, the $1 billion that would have cost another owner. They take ownership in that. Stan Kroenke, the Rams owner, has purchased 60 acres next to Hollywood Park, and there's rumors of the Rams coming back. If he could buy from St. Louis, if he could buy that adjacent room at Hollywood Park, there'd be room there for a stadium. So there's a few things in motion here, and you got to remember the Chargers, 30% of their premium revenues, the stadium suites, the TV rights. That's Orange County, L.A. So for them to sit idly by and have another team swoop in there, they got to be proactive at some point. They're on their 7th mayor since the search has gone on.
So they make their decision.
They're waiting to hear what.
Well, it's interesting at football. We were talking in the newsroom earlier. Baseball has a whole different financial structure. Football has a salary cap, fixed costs, and a big, rich TV contract. You really don't even have to sell a ticket to make money if you're a football owner.
That's true.
And if you build a new stadium with taxpayer-supported money here, you only have. How many you have? 10, 12 football games a year. Maybe San Diego State comes in. We're talking about fewer than 24 events in the whole year. It's hard to rectify that with a baseball stadium. We've got at least 81 home games.
Which was really the crux of one of the Chargers' most recent proposals when the vote was coming up to expand the convention center. They were saying, let's instead build a new stadium over here. We'll put a retractable roof on it.
Marry those ideas.
We'll marry them together. You take the new bridge across Harbor there, and you have a convention center that can build up the dates. They were, that was derailed when the California Coastal Commission said the expansion project can go through. That said, again, there's 3 lawsuits on the table regarding that. So, I think it all comes down, football's a game about field position. This is a stadium about land use. And for anything to work in San Diego, the mayor or someone's going to have to agree to use that land at Qualcomm Stadium, use that land at the sports arena, marry that land together, whether you just sell it off or you sell it and develop it, have that money be the money that the city donates toward the $1 billion stadium.
Now, I've talked with my fellow reporters here, and I'm not a big football fan myself. I must say I'm a hockey and baseball fan. And how do you convince us? We're not big football fans,
well,
not big backers of the NFL.
That was the key. You have to sell it. It can't be a stadium for the Chargers.
Right.
It has to be a stadium for Aztecs, Chargers, Final Fours, World Cups, and the convention.
Many other
center,
events in the community.
And concerts. I mean, tractor pulls, whatever you want to do.
Right.
I think, too, the San Diego fans or voters, if you will, they still feel the sting a little bit of Petco Park. There's no question Petco Park is a jewel, but it was sold, or implied anyway, that those revenue streams that this new flashy stadium would open up would let them compete for the high-priced free agents, would let them have a competitive
and
team.
that hasn't played out.
They won 2 divisional titles, but it hasn't played out.
Of course, again, football, a different thing. Well, let me ask my Joe and Amitha here, you're going to support them as taxpayers? You want taxpayer money to go to the Charger ownership to enrich them with the super suites and the corporate seats?
I don't think the public will.
No.
I don't think the public will.
You don't see that?
The climate system.
If a mayor had to go to a vote here, couldn't possibly do it without one, you don't think it passes?
I'm just thinking World Cup. Brazil, so many protests about all the money that was spent on that, and then they end up losing. It's kind of it seems to be sort of a common theme.
Right, and the Padres, of course, they got that vote right after the World Series back in '98, and you wonder if they ever would have gotten it without that success on the field.
We go back now to an on-the-field product this year. If it has a good year, maybe that gives the team traction.
Well, we'll see what happens on that sphere. All right, that wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Amitha Sharma of KPBS News, KPBS Fronteras reporter Joe Replogle, and sports writer Jay Paris. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.